Welcome to Voice of Business, brought to you by Capital Club Dubai and Botho Major Markets Group. Each month, we talk to business leaders from across the region about their successes and challenges they're having in their respective industries. Our guest today is Amanda Turnbull. Amanda has worked in high-growth markets from across the world, and also has the distinct pleasure of being one of the few people who's worked in multiple media channels, from print to digital to television. My name is Isaac Kwekufoku, and I'm your host. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today. Pleasure.
Happy to be here.
I'd like to start off by asking about your journey in the media space since you started this journey, maybe I'd say close to 30 years ago. What has changed and what remains the same in that space?
Yeah, it's a nice question to start with, isn't it? It's, I think in terms of what's the same, I think there's really no change in the fact that brands are still really important as consumer signposts. So, you have a sea of choice, and I feel very passionately that brands are really important to signify quality to consumers. So that's something that hasn't changed. And through my career, I've always tried to work for brands that align with my values and that I consider to be good signposts. So over the years, yes, Discovery, but also brands like Elle, South China Morning Post, and so on. I think what has changed, though, for these brands is that, if you think about when I first started back in the Middle Ages, in print, a magazine was something that you went to buy on a newsstand, and that was it. It was quite transactional, but you had to go and get it. Now, these brands have to insert themselves into your life in multiple touch points, so that they're with you all the time, so that they're always relevant, always top of mind, always providing value and service. So now, just to use the same analogy, if you look at a print magazine, yes, sure, it's a print magazine, but it is so much more than that, plus. So it's got its digital footprint, social media footprint. The really clever brands have done lots of good licensing deals. So, you can go to the Vogue Cafe, you can go to the Vogue Academy, merchandising and so on. So these brands have to be everywhere now, and they have to be relevant and much more in a consumer's life, rather than just being that one transactional thing that you go and buy every month on a newsstand.
Sure, but I guess what caused the disruption? What caused that change? Was it because consumers were not satisfied with that one-way transaction?
No, I think the main disruptor obviously is technology, and I think how brands and organizations have reacted to technology is always very telling. So are you going to be Nokia and Kodak, or are you actually going to really embrace it and do something more with it? So I think that technology has caused this disruption and rethinking of the business. But if you take a brand like Fatafit, which was what brought me to the region originally back in 2014, that was originally a free-to-air channel. Now, if you look at it, it's a holistic brand with a direct-to-consumer app, linear channels, a digital and social media footprint of 12 million, a consumer products line. You can go buy Fatafit products at Costa. So we, the brands have to evolve.
And I guess you gave the Fatafit example, and that was actually a really good example of, I guess, one of the things you did when you first moved into this region. And I can imagine, as you're starting to think about the space, and you say to yourself, most of my competitors are free to air, right? That's what they're doing. What prompts the level of thinking? I guess that strategic thinking, and say, look, we believe this is the future. We think this is where the industry is going to go, and so we're going to take a stab at this in a way that we think is constructive, and we think it's going to be very profitable. How do you come to that conclusion and draw those analysis?
Yeah, well, it was a really tough decision because in this region you've got, I think it's possibly more now, but at that time 95 million free-to-air households across the GCC. And pay TV was obviously much smaller than that. But it was about having a more secure revenue stream. So when you're in free-to-air, your revenue stream is only from advertising, which you have to reinvent every year. Whereas when you're in pay TV, your revenue stream is you sign a 3-year deal, distribution deal. So in terms of securing the future for the brand, actually putting it into pay was ironic, really, because it gave the brand a more financially secure future, although there was less people to view it because you'd taken it out of free-to-air. So that's why we had to develop that quickly, a social and digital footprint. And actually what we had done at that point was change the team. So we had inherited a publishing division, print publishing, with a lot of great library, visuals and recipes and so on. So we flipped those into digital, which meant they reached more people. And again, a secondary monetization that way. The other thing is, especially with television, that content investment is intense.
Sure.
I mean, you're making, even Fatty Feet, they're making, I think, 350, 400 new content hours a year. So that has to be covered. And I think the challenge was that in the free-to-air space, it was being sold as a standalone channel. Mm-hmm. So, okay, that was a great conversation with brands like Al Rawabi, some of the oils and grains brands in the food space. But there was never enough ad revenue to justify. And in this region, it's very difficult to sell as a standalone channel. It's much easier to sell as a portfolio. So if you look at a company like NBC, for example, where they're selling 14 channels. So we just didn't get economies of scale at that point. So we flipped the revenue stream, but it benefited. I mean, the PR was tough at the time. So we quickly had to develop the digital footprint. And now I'm very proud. I mean, I'm no longer there, but still super proud of the direct-to-consumer work that we did to actually develop the Fatty Feet app, which has the linear live stream in it, plus a cooking academy and a whole load of content, which is you don't see on linear. So,
sure.
That's the evolution. So to your earlier point about how brands have to evolve.
What are some of the trigger points for you? At what point do you say to yourself, you know what, I think we need to change? Or is it that, or is it just that, you learn to feel the moment, if you know what I mean? It's like ride a bicycle on a mountaintop or something. Like, how do you think through?
Yeah, I mean that's quite a difficult question to answer. I think there's a number of things in there, so to unpack them. I mean, to the point about a brand like Kodak, for example. I mean, that's the classic business school case study, isn't it? I mean, I think a total lack of diversity in their management was one of their key issues because they all saw it the same way. One of the joys of my career, because I've always chosen to work in emerging markets, which I think you should really call high growth markets now. I think they've emerged. But anyway, Asia Pacific, Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, Turkey, and so on, is that you're working in such diversity. So you always have, around your boardroom table, you've got 12 different opinions because you've got people from all over the place. And that I have always really enjoyed. So I think my role as MD in these situations has always been to listen to all of it and try and synthesize that. You have to be on top of the trends. You've got to be aware. And then you have to think about, okay, how does that apply here? And then the other thing I would say is that it's about finding partners to quickly scale. So rather than always trying to build it yourself, sometimes it's quicker to work with somebody collaboratively. Interestingly, in this region, that's quite challenging. It's more challenging than it should be.
But anyway, so we're talking earlier about free to air to pay TV. Fast forward now. Is pay TV still the model?
What's really interesting in the TV space at the moment is, and the exciting disruption that I really enjoy sort of watching happening in front of me is the rise of the streamers. And they're all, it's obviously enabled by technology, but what I like about this is that content is still crucial. So for me in my career, content and brand have always been the things that have given me a framework within which to work. So for the streamers, they're all playing on the same playing field, but they're playing different games completely. It's hilarious. I mean, some of them are digging down, some of them are trying to climb up, some of them are going right, some of them are going left. It's hilarious. So you've got the incumbent, the granddaddy now, which is Netflix, which have been throwing money at creating content for the longest time, now actually breaking even. 208 million global subs. It's a huge number. Wow. And yet their Q1 earnings results, everyone's like, oh, panic, Netflix growth is stalling because they only added 4 million. Yeah, it's like, hello, people. They're double the nearest competitor, but hey. So I think with Netflix, what you've got right now is some issues around their hit rate with content. So they spend 17 billion annually. It's an enormous amount of money. Their hit rate isn't as good as somebody like HBO Max, which is interesting. And if you look at the recent Oscars, they had lots of nominations, but not so many wins. In fact, what was interesting about this year's Oscars was that it was a real triumph for Hollywood. But So that's the question around Netflix at the moment, the sustainability of the business model, because you are giving everybody this amazing amount of content. There's a new movie every day. It's crazy, the level of investment. They do have the lowest churn rate, which I think is about the tech and the algorithms and how they try to help you choose. But the jury's out on whether or not it's a sustainable business model. Then you've got somebody like Disney, who's just come in with Disney Plus. That's, again, a different game that they're playing because they own their IP. And this is one of the challenges for Netflix, is that as all the studios launch their own streamers, they're pulling their content off Netflix and putting it into a walled garden of their own. So Netflix has to spend more money because it has to create its own content. Sure. So Disney owns the IP, but they are really all into their model because they are pulling linear channels, for example. So they've just closed, I think, 18 of their linear channels in Asia Pacific. And the only way you can get that content now in Asia Pacific is to watch it on Disney Plus. But they've really ramped up. I think they're at something like 95 million, nearly 100 million subs, which they've done so quickly. It's unbelievable.
Oh, so quick.
Yeah, super quick.
Wow.
So that's exceeded their expectations, I think, by about 6 times,
Sure.
how quickly they've done that. So that's an interesting model. Then you've got Amazon and Prime, and that's really more about keeping Amazon Prime shoppers shopping. So that's a completely different model. But again, I think Amazon's really the one to watch because of their understanding of the data, their incredibly deep pockets. I mean, they just released quarterly results, smashing it out of the park, absolutely incredible.
And they have an ecosystem.
They have an ecosystem, but they understand the customers.
Right.
And, somebody like Jeff Bezos is obsessed with his customers, and it's really paying off. So I think if you think about how you commission content, they know so much about what people want to buy, what they want to watch, and so on. That's an interesting way to look at it. But it's a very different strategy behind their business because it's all about keeping their prime customers happy and engaged.
Sure.
So, and then you've got Apple, which has an absolutely tiny library and space to grow for sure, an amazing brand reputation. But again, why they're in this game is to sell more hardware. So you buy the new iPhone and you get, a year's worth of Apple TV. Now, quite what you're watching, I'm not sure, but there's some good stuff there.
Right.
And for me, Apple is the one to watch because I think that's where, and Amazon potentially, but that's where the aggregation's going to come. So they've got to acquire other people. So there'll be lots more M&A activity because they're going to have to buy content. But back to my collaboration point, I think what's interesting is that if you want to win in this space, you've got to give the consumer everything that they want in one place, so it makes it really easy. So, for example, in the UK, that's the Sky strategy. So on Sky, you can get everything, literally. You can get Netflix, you can get Amazon, you can get all the Sky stuff. Everything you want is all just sitting on one platform. So
where do you put Sony in that conversation?
Where's Sony?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a very good question. You seem very well informed. Sony is interesting because they're doing another different strategy. So they don't have their own streamer and they're still enjoying the arms race for content.
Exactly,
So they're selling their content and they just did a very interesting windowing deal with Amazon.
Interesting.
And they're very collaborative. They're an interesting company. They've also just done a really interesting deal here with Stars Play, where Stars Play is embedded onto their new TVs. So yeah, that's a very collaborative strategy. There are still some companies who don't want to build their own streamers, and so they are able to go out there and be like a sort of supply content in this race. But I guess the other thing I would say is that this content bonanza is great news for producers. So they've never had it so good. It's like the golden era because everybody needs content of all sorts. And certainly in the space that I'm most interested in, which is what you would call sort of factual entertainment, it's really, really a great thing to see everybody wanting more non-scripted content. So I'm on the board for a new, fantastic new startup called Impact Entertainment Media, and they will benefit hugely from this ability to step into the space where they're creating content that is purposeful and important.
You mentioned you're on the board of this IEM organization. What types of shows are they trying to put up? It's impact shows around SDGs and things of the nature. And
Exactly. It's so they're developing a slate of sort of somewhere between 40 and 60 different formats, and within that they're running the gamut from competition format shows through to more observational documentaries, travel, people, sport, everything like that. So it's a very wide remit, and what they're wanting to do is take it to both streamers and terrestrials and see where they get to. I think there's an interesting model there because you can look at it you can take a format and you can do it in a territory, and then this is a sort of proven methodology. If it works, for a couple of seasons in territory, then you can globalize it.
Have you seen some trends around that? Have you seen some interesting companies looking at interactivity? Do you think there are ways that some of these OTT platforms can also get better at making some of these things a bit more interactive? So the audience, in addition to I'm engaged because of the content, I'm also engaged because I'm exchanging something. I'm interacting with this content. Is that something that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope so. I mean, certainly at the moment, it's happening most in the competition format space,
right?
Because obviously voting is important, but there's no reason why you couldn't. I mean, so you're voting for outcomes, but there's no reason why you couldn't get to a point where you were voting for a storyline. So you could be watching a drama or a series, and there's a moment where the character has to make a decision, then the audience can be engaged with that. I mean, I think what's always important about content is how, even though we're talking about all of these global trends and we all watch the same sort of stuff, and everybody, to use my Narcos example, I mean, everybody watches Narcos. Here,
right.
Everybody watches Turkish content and so on. But I still think there's a big opportunity for genuinely local content that resonates with a local audience, and that then if you could have some way of affecting the outcome, that would be very interesting.
Content has been localized, whether it's in India, whether it's in Africa, whether it's wherever else. I guess a couple of things there. A, is that here to stay? But B, there's also issues around quality. So if you look at the Nollywood conversation, right, there's always a question about, but the quality isn't there, right? Or Bollywood, the quality is not quite there yet. Is that a real conversation, or is that a pushback from, I'd say, entrenched interests that say the quality doesn't exist? And if it's really the quality isn't there, how do you bring some of these spaces up to snuff in terms of quality to make sure that they're actually being able to not just compete globally, but someone in Oklahoma City is watching content from Mumbai in a way that they enjoy, just like Narcos?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I think it will come. I think the quality argument, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, you want, if you're a platform like Netflix, you want global quality. There is a sort of basic benchmark level of entry that you have to get over. But I think what's exciting is that there is real opportunity. And again, not that I'm trying to promote Netflix, it sounds like I'm almost employed by them, but what I like is the way they come into a market and they experiment with local producers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. They're beginning to do that in Africa, they're doing it here, and that raises everybody, it raises all the boats.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think often you've got to look at your studio and production facilities in order to facilitate that quality. And here again is where governments can step in. So, for example, Hans Freykin at the Abu Dhabi Film and TV Commission, there is a role for government there to support because it's heavy expenditure, to build studios, to build all of this sort of stuff that you need. But once built, then it's a question of how do you use it collaboratively. Right. So the model at the moment is for a big TV company to build their own. But now I think it would be better if you looked at a more sort of government supported way.
What are you working on?
Well, it's a fascinating thing. It's liberating, but at the same time slightly scary. So I've been corporate for the last 30 plus years, and now I'm running my own business. What I'm really enjoying is the intellectual stimulation of answering client briefs, which are across a very broad range. I've set myself up to advise as a thinking partner, I guess, in the sort of media, culture and entertainment space. So it's quite a broad remit. But it's working very well. And I'm doing that. I'm developing non-executive director positions and roles. So I guess I'm trying to develop a portfolio. And so that's going nicely. But the thing that I'm beginning to be I've always been passionate about it, but I'm now beginning to see how I might develop this further is in the educational space, but still in media. So, a lot of people sort of fall into media. Journalism's slightly different because you generally have to do a journalism course or degree or something. But in terms of the media management, on any of the creative or the business sides, often people fall into it, and there's not so much formal training. So I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at working with individual clients and groups to try to put bespoke training together for them in this space. So that's really, getting me here. I think you need to be here and here. Sure. You need to feel that there's a purpose in addition to, making sure you can pay the rent.
What do you miss about corporate life? What do you miss about some of those privileges, luxuries, whatever you as an executive with a big budget, with a big company behind you, what have you? What do you miss?
Well, I tell you what I miss actually is working with a group of people that that was one of the sad things about leaving, is that I just felt I got the team to a point where it was just a beautiful experience and really fun. So I miss the team, because running your own business is a much more solitary affair. Right. I'm not missing the sort of corporate strictures, to be honest. I've chosen to stay in Dubai, is that I feel that this is a brilliant place to set up a business, because it's a great place for global nomads, and COVID is only going to make that even better. So I think this is a cultural crossroads here, and you can be here, but you can do business in Asia, in Africa, back into Europe incredibly easily. So that I'm very cognizant of, and is one of the reasons to stay. And Stars Play, you've got the incumbents who've got streaming products, beIN and OSN in the pay space. NBC Shahid just launching Shahid VIP, absolutely brilliant service. Then you've got people like Stars Play, View. There's just so much going on in this space. Really interesting, and it's gradually turning the region into a pay, a region that entertains pay. Sure. Because for the longest time, people thought, oh no, nobody will pay, because the free to air was so good and so prevalent. Exactly. Yeah, but what's interesting, and that's what's so fascinating about the Shahid model, is that they're going from a free to air broadcaster with all of that legacy and history into a pay space.
Next 10 years, next X years in this industry space, what do you see? What's happening?
Yeah, next 10 years, I wish I knew that. I would obviously be far wealthier. What I think is interesting right now is this whole tension around data privacy and data management, and gradually consumers getting much more switched on about how they want their data to be handled by the companies, and again, with younger people particularly, getting frustrated about the fact that they are being commoditized. So I think there will be I think social media is going to be smaller in some way. So I think you're going to have to delineate what you want from social media. So instead of just putting everything out there on Facebook, you're going to have to be a bit more discerning. So I think there'll be more content conscious curation of your own personal profiles. And when you're in your personal and social space, it's going to get much smaller and much more private. So I think WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, that is interesting. And then when you have to have a public profile, as we all do, because so much of that is linked to our economic activity, it's going to be much cleaner. But everyone is going to be more aware of their value as a piece of data, what they want to share and what they don't want to share. There's
some challenges that you'd like to part on.
Love this question. Talk about your failures, always good.
How awesome are you not?
Yes, right, exactly. I think a lot, as you come through a career, a lot is about building confidence, and having the confidence to call out things when you don't feel that they're right. So for me, there's a lot. I operate a lot on gut instinct. So there's been moments where my gut was, oh no, I don't like that, and I should have said something and I didn't. So I think being brave, irrespective of your age, status, job title, is really important. I should add that having employed lots of millennials in the workplace recently, it's they don't seem to have that problem. They're absolutely fine. Because I've worked in so many different markets, I have some sort of funny war stories about, not listening properly and not stepping back and looking at things from a different cultural perspective. So, for example, when I first set up the ad sales business for Discovery in Moscow, I ended up renting an office for the team, and the guy said to me at the time, well, there's no view. And I was like, okay.
Okay.
Their salespeople are supposed to be out of the office anyway.
Exactly.
What that actually meant was, when we got there, having signed the lease, there's no window. It was like an internal, literally
no view.
box. Yeah, there's no view. Meant there's no window. So that was slightly unfortunate, and that was just when you're operating in different markets, you have to suspend your judgment completely, because the way you think by default won't necessarily be correct. And so the other thing you need in markets like that is very good guidance and advice and local people on the ground who you then listen to. But what's been fascinating for me is seeing the same sort of business challenges, but with a different cultural gloss. So when we've launched, back in my days with Hachette, we launched 8 editions of L around the region. And they had a brilliant concept of glocal, which was global and local. It always sounded like a spelling mistake. But so they trained everybody the same way, but they really wanted 60% of the magazine to be local. And they wanted their teams to focus on making that as good as possible. And then they had 40% of the book that was taken from the whole network, and that worked really well. But it was fascinating to see how the editorial challenges played out, in Taipei versus Tokyo versus Bangkok. That was a hugely fantastic learning for me.
Interesting.
So I think being incredibly open-minded and brave and honest is really a bit crucial.
Amanda, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been lovely talking. Very insightful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for making the time, and it's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation between Amanda and I. We look forward to having you again on our next episode of Voice of Business, brought to you by Capital Club Dubai and Botho Emerging Markets Group.